May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. What do you fear? I went to a movie, Risen, on Friday, and toward the end of the movie, Yeshua is asking a Roman soldier, what do you fear? We live in a culture of fear and doubt, and yet we're called to a culture of faith and trust. William Sloane Coffin wrote, faith isn't believing without proof, it is entrusting without reservation. Today we heard the story of Abram, the father of faith. He had been promised by God long before that if he left his homeland and he would go where God was leading him, that he would be given land and he would become a great nation, meaning that he would have children, descendants, heirs. So at this particular time had passed, there had been wars, and still there was no heir. So he had questions, he had doubts. Doubt is not the opposite of faith, it's a part of faith. So he questioned God, what are you going to give me because I have no heir? And as we know from other stories of Abram had plan A, which we heard about today. He also will have a plan B that didn't work out so well. But God made covenant with him. He reaffirmed his promises to Abram, cut a covenant, and then Abram had to wait and wait and wait. Sometimes we have to wait to see God's promises fulfilled. Last week we heard about Jesus being led into the wilderness to face temptation by Satan. It's kind of going backward at that time because it was right after Jesus was baptized and he heard the voice from heaven saying, "You are my son, my beloved, with whom I am well pleased." And then he was led into the wilderness by Satan to be tempted in all the ways that we're tempted, to gratify the passions of our flesh, to want wealth and power, to put God to the test. And interestingly, before each one of those tests, those temptations, Satan said, "If you are the Son of God, if you are the Son of God, if you are the Son of God." He was tempting Jesus to distrust God, distrust the voice he heard, and doubt what his identity was. But we heard how Jesus refuted Satan. He used God's word to put Satan in his place until an opportune time. Then in our scriptures today, we see Jesus being tempted again. 3 Pharisees came, not 3, some Pharisees came. 3 is such a part of our culture, isn't it? Some Pharisees came to warn Jesus not to go into Jerusalem. But he knew what was waiting for him in Jerusalem. He had been telling his disciples what was waiting. Some scholars believe that these Pharisees were truly trying to warn Jesus that there was a death warrant out for him by Herod. But other scholars say, well, that's inconsistent with the other notions of the Pharisees in this particular gospel. Whatever it was and whatever their motivation, it was a temptation for Jesus to turn back from certain death, to escape what was waiting for him in Jerusalem. But Jesus would not do it. He knew what God was calling him to do. He still had work to do, and he was on his way. So he told the Pharisees, "You tell that fox." A fox was believed to be very sly and cunning, also very dangerous. Then he turned his thoughts toward Jerusalem, and he wept. "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets and you stone those sent to you." And then he talked of himself as if he were a mother hen. "How I longed to gather your children under my wings, but you were not willing." Perhaps he was going to Jerusalem for one more time to see if he could gather his children to himself. We know what will happen. There's a story that you probably have heard. I've heard it in several different ways. It's a story about a farmer, and he had a wildfire go through his farm. There was a friend of his who came and was going to walk with him through his farm to look at the damage. And as they were walking, they saw a pile of burned rags. His friend went over and kicked at the rags, and out scurried 6 little yellow chicks. And when they bent down to those rags, they realized it was the mother hen who had gathered her chicks to protect them. She gave up her life so that they could have life. In a few short weeks, we're going to see Jesus spread his wings on the hardwood of the cross, that all may come within the reach of his saving embrace. What is the fox, or who is the fox in our lives, who is trying to lead us away from being obedient to God, from trusting in God, and trusting ourselves to him? What doubts or fears are there? Do we doubt God's word? Do we doubt that we truly are the sons and daughters of the Most High God? When our prayers are not answered in the way we think they should be, do we wonder if there's even a God? Do we distrust God? Are we afraid of him? What are our fears? What are our doubts? We can trust in the God who is the loving God, whose very character is love, and whose nature is always to have mercy. The fox is on the prowl. Sometimes the fox is in the hen house within the church. Sometimes when we disagree with someone, whether it's in the church or outside the church, or we don't think that the way they're living is the right way to live, we can set fire with our tongues. We can try to destroy with gossip. And sometimes we can be an antagonist in the church who undermines the ministry of others. The fox is on the prowl, but we don't need to fear. We can hide ourselves under the shelter of God's wings. It is said that God is not looking for people of great faith. He's looking for people who will follow him. And it's in following him and stepping out in faith into what you're not sure of yet. You don't have all the answers. It's not certainty, but you're stepping out in faith. That as you go along, then your faith becomes strong and you see proof of your faith. Amen.